welcome to the Upstream Downlow. The download on the upstream oil and gas industry in the state of Texas from the standpoint of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. This is our relatively new podcast, and this is our third edition of that. I'm Karr Ingham. I have the great privilege to serve as now the president of this organization since 2024. And having been associated with the Alliance for 20 years in advance of that as our petroleum economist and then EVP, and it's a great industry to represent. It's a fantastic industry to represent. And it's a great group of members that we represent, from large to small. We have a history and a legacy and a reputation for representing smaller private independent oil and gas companies, and I hope very effectively, and I hope even more so going forward. We also have the privilege of serving our great big oil and gas companies in Texas from a state level legislative and regulatory standpoint. And big oil is important. It's a big world, and it takes big companies doing big things to bring it to them. But we have an extraordinary landscape of oil and gas companies in Texas, from large to small and everything in between, and they all have a spot. And we know they have a spot because every barrel of crude oil they pull out of the ground, they can move into the marketplace and sell it. So from our standpoint and from an advocacy standpoint, we want to do everything we can to keep something external from interrupting that, from costing them out of business or costing their wells out of business. That's what we do, among others. We have events, we have insurance programs, we do things that add value to membership, but that's our primary function as an oil and gas trade association, is to represent the industry in Texas, our member oil and gas companies in Texas. And we do so in Austin and in Washington, D.C. as well. We play in that swamp as well, and it is one, but important things happen there that affect oil and gas companies and independent oil and gas companies. And we don't want to be on the sidelines while these things are happening. So again, welcome to the third edition of the Upstream Downlow. And it's my great honor, Mr. Chairman. Today we have the chairman of the House Energy Resources Committee in the great state of Texas, Chairman Drew Darby, joining us. Mr. Chairman, I'm honored by this, and I appreciate you doing it.
Well, thank you, Karr. And I very much appreciated your introduction about your company, your alliance, and the industry that we all support here in this great state. So I appreciate your comments, and certainly appreciate the alliance and what it does for advancing the oil and gas industry and the interest of those members of your association. So it's been my honor to represent their interest in this legislative process for a number of years, and proud to do so.
So you're a San Angelo guy?
I am. Born and reared, as they say, in San Angelo. West Texas is in my blood. The dust and the oil is there from the start. I was fortunate enough to come to Austin on an athletic scholarship in the mid-'60s, and played football under Darryl Royal, and stayed and got a law degree in addition to a finance degree, and moved back to San Angelo and raised my family there, and then I've had the honor and the privilege of representing now 10 counties out in West Texas. A lot of the Concho Valley, of course, San Angelo, Montgomery County, and of course some of the Permian Basin, Reagan County, Sterling, Erie, and Glasscock are all represented by me. And so, you know, I have been fortunate to be a rural lawyer. As a rural lawyer, you do a lot of different things. I've primarily been an oil and gas lawyer for that 50 years. I've done a lot of water rights. I help adjudicate all the water rights along the Concho River Basin back in the mid-'70s, along with the Colorado River Basin. So I'm familiar with water rights and the challenges associated with that. But I have suffered along with the industry for the peaks and the valleys of the oil and gas industry. We are so connected as a community and as a region to the oil and gas industry that as you know, the oil and gas industry gets a stomach ache. We all get a stomach ache, and I was around when in October of 1983 when the First National Bank of Midland went under, and that was a primary source of capital to fund oil and gas exploration back then. And so that turned the industry on its head. And I have lived through, again, these down valleys that force labor and experienced workforce out of the industry into other industries. And then I've been around when they've called them back to the oil and gas industry because technology has changed. I've been around when they have declared the oil and gas industry in the Permian Basin dead.
Yes.
You know, that's all there is. We're never going to get any more. And then technology has advanced to a place where now we are the envy of the world, to tell you the truth, and what we're able to do here in Texas in the Permian Basin and Delaware Basin. So it's been an honor and a privilege. I've been a member of the Texas Legislature this is my 10th term. I've been privileged to lead the Energy Resources Committee on in a number of sessions, and it's been my honor to be a voice for the oil and gas industry during that time.
So did you hold any elective office prior to running for the State House?
I was a city council person there in San Angelo, and the years leading up to that, I was chairman of the Water Advisory Board for a number of years. I was on the Economic Development Corporation, Planning Commission. I kind of fill slots all over. One of my most interesting times, I was head of the Civil Service Commission there in San Angelo, and I helped arbitrate, if you will, police and fire employees with the administration and how their service to our community was regulated under civil service. That lost me a few gray hairs right then, but no, I've tried to be active in my community. I think it is a process of learning. You have to develop an understanding of all aspects of these issues that face the legislature, and I think my business background, my legal background, my public service background has prepared me for that mission, and so I feel greatly rewarded in that service, and I hope my service has been worth it to the folks I represent.
So 10 terms, 20 years. That'd be, if my math is all right, that's pretty easy math. So let's just say 2006 or somewhere about it.
I was elected in 2006. My first term was in 2007. And so even in the legislature during that period of time, we've seen a lot of challenges. I have been a part of the process as we were driving down to Austin, the revenue estimate shifted from a negative $5 billion
Right.
to a negative
Yes.
$10 billion or something like that. We've had wonderful successes in this state with treasures beyond belief. The role of the legislature is to try to manage that, and I'm very proud of helping create measures that will last and endure through these peaks and valleys that I just told you about. I grew up in an era where oil and gas formed a major part of the Texas economy, but as that industry cycled down, so did the Texas economy. And so we've made a concerted effort over these last 20 years plus to diversify the Texas economy, to make sure we keep oil and gas relevant and important and manage that industry, but we also want to encourage and develop other industries to come in. So we'll have a diversified tax basis and a diversified income stream for our services that are needed here in this state. We don't have an income tax. We're never going to have an income tax.
Thank goodness for that.
So agreed. And so we fund government through ad valorem taxes, and we fund it through sales taxes and of course fees. And but I think this state has done really a good job of trying to protect the future of Texas, the future economies of this state, by creating, among other things, our rainy day fund, as it's called. We were able to take severance taxes generated from the oil and gas industry.
Right.
These are all revenues associated with the oil and gas industry, and we've managed to slice off a piece of that and put it into an account. Some would call it a mattress, but we're putting money under that mattress, and I think that's a good thing. We need to not consider it an object that cannot be touched, but we need to consider it as available if we do have another valley, that we will be able to use those revenues to sustain the current growth and expectation of government services that people have. And so it has been so successful, and the oil and gas industry has been so successful, that we're reaching the point where all the additional revenue will flow into the general revenue. So that's an extraordinary amount of money, $28 billion. Right. So I'm particularly proud of that. We've implemented a lot of measures to help families educate their kids, and we continue to invest in our roads and our water infrastructure.
Well, you talk about your tenure during these periods of ups and downs in the economy and in the oil and gas industry. I mean, I don't think there will come a time, I don't care for these terms even as an economist, but it is, it's a boom and bust industry. It's really cyclical, and those cycles are extreme. The highs are highs, the lows can be very low. And so trying to manage a state economy and its revenue and its economy through that, and that's presumably what the rainy day fund is for. That means an economic rainy day. So when you've got a downturn, and the Great Recession was the biggest of those since I've really been involved in the oil and gas industry in Texas. And of course, that was a bloodbath for the national economy, the state's economy. And we had some of that money available then. Heaven forbid if we should have to do one of those again. Well, we are well prepared for it, but you haven't just been involved at a high level in the great state of Texas and the legislature during these ups and downs. You've been involved. This was 2006 was in advance of this shale revolution, energy renaissance, whatever you want to call it. So I'd have to look at the numbers, but in 2006, we might have been somewhere around 1 million barrels a day, maybe slightly over.
I would think right around that 1 million barrels a day.
A little bit, and then 2010, off we go.
Well, I'm reminded, I know you know the story of George Mitchell.
Of course.
And his company working to unlock the secret of how to frack, how to get those carbons out, how to pressurize the rock in order to get the most product out, and spent millions and millions of dollars and years developing it, had the formula. And I was at he was being honored, George Mitchell was being honored with an award at the Bullock Museum for his service. And they told the story of he was at home one night and thinking about the successes he had had in that regard, his engineers had in that regard. And he had it on a piece of paper, and he figured that this is not a proprietary, it could have been a proprietary formula that he would have never released, and his companies could have leased or patented those rights out or licensed those. But he turned around on his computer and he hit send. And by hitting send, he let that formula out to the world. And so that is what's remarkable about the shale revolution, is one man's vision, one man's generosity, one man's hope for the future. And now we all get to enjoy and have enjoyed the benefits of his hard work and diligence and efforts to make that happen. And so you're exactly right. Since that time, Texas has been very blessed. and our economy continues to perform because of those successes.
Well, that increase from 1 million barrels a day, and it was about there in 2010 as well. It, as you know, done nothing but gone down since the early 70s. Kind of bottomed out in that 08, 09 time frame. 2010, post Great Recession, crude oil production starts to climb. We haven't quite hit 6 million barrels a day in Texas yet, but we're sniffing it. Of course, Permian, including New Mexico, huge numbers, but a change from 1 million barrels a day in Texas production to 6 million barrels a day, it's extraordinary in 50 different ways. Brings some challenges with it too, and these challenges show up in the regulatory landscape, the legislative landscape, things that happen every session and in between these sessions. How would you characterize those? And I'm talking about produced water. I'm talking about a growing well inventory, inactive wells, things that you've had to deal with.
There are a lot of aspects of this success. I mean, you've mentioned a few of them: produced water and some of the environmental challenges associated. Well, we also got people moving to this state. We've been extraordinarily successful in tracking people throughout this nation and the world to come to Texas because there's opportunity here. There's land, there's resources, there's a low regulated environment, low taxation. And so with people comes extraordinary increased challenges. They're not bringing their electricity, they're not bringing their water, but when they arrive, they expect schools, they expect roads, they expect water, they expect to turn on the light switch and get power. They expect their business to have ample opportunity to hook onto the grid and get services. And so that's what I like to characterize as advanced thinking. The legislature, meeting every 2 years, is blessed in the fact that we do have an opportunity between the times we meet formally in that building across the street to look at issues, reflect on issues, take testimony, see if prior policies have worked, see if they haven't worked, what do we need to change, and then work on the changes now. This is when, Karr, you know this is when the sausage is made, right now during the interim. And so, it is a process that we look at what the problems are and try not only to solve the current implementation process and problems associated with these issues, we're trying to look around the curve to see what's in the horizon in front of us. That's why SB4, we're creating money with the public's help to try to put more money aside for water infrastructure. When you look at the numbers, I mean, when you see some of the projections of the amount of water infrastructure this state's going to need to grow over the next 25, 30 years, it's an extraordinary amount of money, $174 billion, I believe. Well, we can't get there at one fell swoop, but we can do it incrementally. And that's why we approved $1 billion a year to be put aside for water infrastructure. We funded about $2.5 billion to go into a water fund. And we're making progress, because if we can help solve these local problems, then by plugging leaking lines, by fixing valves, by reducing loss and evaporation in local water systems, and that is resources that we don't have to find someplace else or repurpose other resources. And so a lot of it is looking at the problem both today and seeing what it's going to be in the future, and then planning to get to that future day in an incremental process. And so I think it's like any business. You don't start out on the top rung of your business. You got to work up to it. You got to drill that first well. If you're an independent, you got to figure out what you want to do and how you're going to get there, and then eventually you got to drill that first well, and you got to keep taking care of that well and others to follow if you want to be successful. So
Well, I'm going to come back to some of the rest of these interim issues, but since you've teed up the water subject, I mean, the oil and gas industry, as you know, has a keen interest in water for a host of different reasons. One of the reasons they have a keen interest in the problem you just mentioned is the possibility of turning produced water, which is problematic and a liability now, into a potential asset, which is helping to solve the water problem in Texas. And these volumes of produced water, it's hard to. I think the general public, as a rule, has no
No
idea
idea.
what
No idea.
volumes of water we're talking about. The volumes of crude oil are huge, and what multiply that by 4 or 5 on average, and you've got daily production of water that's not usable coming up and has to be dealt with. And we hope we're moving toward a solution that that gives that water a purpose and turns it into something of value rather than liability. I just wonder, you've paid a lot of attention to this. The committee's paid a lot of attention to this. The
Absolutely.
legislature has. How do you, truthfully, what's your sense of how far out that is, where that's a
So we're here.
scalable solution?
We're here now. I mean, we know how to do it. Let me give you a little background. Being in West Texas, we're water challenged anyway. And so there's always been friction between oil and gas operators needing water to enhance the fracking operation and production. So the oil industry has evolved, and they have been good citizens in that regard, because we as elected officials and people who live in the area, there's not enough water for the cities, for agribusiness, for livestock, for industrial, and oil and gas too. The oil and gas industry has been very sensitive to that, and they have switched largely from potable water and groundwater to treating brackish water sources now, and then they're actually treating and reusing water in their operations.
Absolutely.
So they've been good corporate citizens in that regard. Now there've been some abuses, but certainly you're going to have that in any industry. But the reality is they have been sensitive to that, and they've adapted. But they've been so successful in finding oil and gas that the production model yields 4 to 5 times the volume in produced water. That's water in a different content, if you will. There's other things mixed in there. There are chemicals, there are minerals, there are substances that need to be removed. Right now, this state is in a crisis, in my opinion, because we have so much water. We've been in a drought so long. We have so much friction and conflict between urban areas and end users that look over the now empty reservoir and say, well, it's that refinery using all of our water, or it's oil and gas using our water. So we have to try to address that concern. And so it makes no sense to me for an oil and gas operator to take the cheap way out and simply reintroduce it back thousands of feet underground under high pressure, in which they pay typically 50 cents a barrel to throw it back down a hole and never to be recovered again. While we have spent millions of dollars to lift it to the surface, let's find a use for it. And we know how to treat it. It's just high energy intensive. And it's not economical at this point for operators that are faced between spending 50 cents a barrel and, I don't know, $1.50, $2.50. I don't know what the ultimate figure is going to be. But somehow my role and the legislature's role in this process is trying to mesh the two. Because if we can't figure out how to use this water and make it potable for industrial reuse or agribusiness reuse or municipal reuse or putting it in a stream basin, then the oil and gas industry will cease, because we're running out of places to put it. everybody is aware of the seismicity issues.
Yes.
I have been at really kind of the tip of the spear on that for a number of years, because back in 2017 and 18, we were in an energy resources meeting, actual committee meeting, when there was an earthquake in Azle, Texas. And that earthquake, everybody suspected, and I think the evidence later showed that it was seismicity induced by disposal well for produced water at high pressure in close proximity to known faulting. Okay, so what did we do? We said there's not enough data. I believe you ought to let data drive the discussion. Don't let politics drive the discussion.
I'm for that.
And so we created the TextNet system
Yes.
that has permanent and mobile arrays that are constantly being monitored, and that data is provided to the Railroad Commission and the state seismologist, and they make decisions based upon science about where you can place a disposal well and how much pressure you can have and at how much volume you can have. And I think that's a good thing, because we're letting science drive that discussion, and producers should have comfort in that, to know that this is just not a political decision. This is being made by a regulatory agency that's looking at the data to do that. And so we're running out of places to put produced water. We have it on the surface. Why don't we spend the amount of money that it takes to treat it to a level of reuse? And so I was particularly pleased this last session that we were able to approach this problem on multi-fronts, but two I'll mention this afternoon. One is that there's always a liability issue. You know, if landowners, they sign oil and gas leases, lease their minerals, and then an operator says, well, I don't have enough volume of water on my lease premises. I'd like to take it off lease premises and combine it with other water, because the recycler needs a vast volume to work on. And then there was always the concern, well, if they treat it to a level of value, where it has value, who gets the money for that? Well, the recycler is not going to spend the money to treat it if they've got somebody else standing with their hand out for a portion of that value. And so absent a surface use agreement or a lease to the contrary, then that recycler has full title to that property, and he can spend the money, and he knows that if there's value achieved, that he gets the benefit of that. And so we aligned all that in this last session. We also transferred oversight for issuing water permits to the TCQ from the Railroad Commission. Yes. And so we're kind of at a point right now where we need to start seeing some results. There's 3 draft permits out there for review. We need to get those reviewed, implemented, passed, and allow these recyclers to start fulfilling the terms of their permit, and knowing, and they'll have assurance that if they spend the money to treat this water, then there's a place where they can offload it for value. And so we're kind of watching that right now. But we're gonna have a hearing, Energy Resources Committee hearing in September, and we're
Heard about that.
We're going to talk about produced water. I mean, clearly, I'm a little bit biased here, but I think if we can all agree that the oil and gas industry is one of the primary supporters of the Texas economy, 37% of our economy is oil and gas related, then we're going to have to make sure that we don't let something like lack of proper taking care of this produced water and waste. We want to make sure it's done properly, according to the law and the rules, and according to the permit. And so we've got to find a use for it, and that checks 2 boxes. We take care of the produced water, and we don't have to worry about seismicity issues.
Well, that's one thing we continue to appreciate. I hope we do. In the great state of Texas and the legislature, there are a growing number of producing states around the country that seem to view it now as their responsibility to put a halt to petroleum energy production, crude oil and natural gas, rather than do things that are necessary to facilitate it. And my goodness, I'm thankful this is not one of them.
Well, we have to recognize there are legitimate concerns. They have positions that we need to be sensitive to and try to accommodate for. I have always taken the position that the process is a balancing. I mean, how do you balance the needs to protect the general public, but yet we have a regulatory framework that is predictable, that people can count on, they understand it, it's sensitive to their needs, and subject to change. If circumstances change, we have the ability to change our regulatory process. So last time I checked, Karr, they don't fly those jet planes over in Iran on batteries.
No. Oh, no.
No, we're going to be in the hydrocarbon business for a long time.
That we are, you know, like it, don't like it. Physics and economic realities are not, they're not only not easily set aside, they're just not set aside. They call them laws for a reason. So
Exactly.
we're all,
Exactly.
But we're, you know, we've done such a great job as a state of providing a much greater amount of those resources to the state, to the nation, and increasingly to the rest of the world. And again, I appreciate the opportunity we have in Texas to continue to do that. Well, we could do this for another several hours, and we don't have time for that. You don't have time for that, which just means we'll have to do it again sometime. But
I'm welcome. I'm ready.
Grateful for your time today, and appreciate you very much joining us on this edition of the Upstream Downlow. Look forward to working with you between now and session and during session, and let us know how we can be of assistance, and I'm sure we'll do the same.
Will do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.